I was kicked out for my stepsister, now she's accusing me of getting her husband fired. I'm 24 now and I've been engaged to Ethan, who is also 24, for about 4 months. We met 4 years ago on a dating app and we've been pretty much glued to each other ever since. I honestly believe we're soulmates. Out of everyone I've known, Ethan is the only person who's never let me down. That means a lot, especially considering the life I've had. Things weren't easy growing up. My parents split when I was just 2. My dad walked out and never looked back. Sure, he sent over child support checks like clockwork, but he never made the effort to see me or check in on how I was doing. To be real, my mom, she's 46 now, wasn't exactly the greatest either. When I was little, her attention was always somewhere else. It felt like she had more interest in her own life than in raising me. Most of the time, I was being looked after by hired help, nannies, babysitters, you name it. As I got older, it became clear that motherhood just wasn't something she cared much about. She was still young back then and way more invested in her social life. She'd be out with friends, going on dates, doing anything but spending time with me. She was a total social butterfly, always flitting from one event to another, and I barely registered on her radar. She never took her job seriously either. She worked as a freelance artist, and while she made decent money, she never really had to worry about me thanks to those child support payments covering everything. Honestly, I think if it weren't for that money, she probably would have kicked me out way earlier. She never had much of a bond with me. In fact, it always seemed like she was counting down the years until I was old enough to leave and she wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. Then, around the time I turned 13, she started dating a guy named Matt. He's 50 now, and he had a daughter who was about my age. Let's call her Lila. When Mom first brought Matt and Lila around to meet me, she told me I had to be on my best behavior because it was really important. That caught me off guard. She'd introduced me to so many of her boyfriends before, but she had never once cared about how I acted. Usually, she'd just say, "We've got company," and that was my cue to head to my room and stay out of sight until they left. But something was different this time. I could tell she was serious about Matt, otherwise she wouldn't have been so uptight about how I behaved. The first time I met Matt and Lila, things went fine. They were pleasant enough and I actually thought it might not be so bad. I had no clue what was coming. Before long, Matt was practically living with us. He was around constantly and Lila would come stay with us every other week. She still spent half her time at her mom's place. At first, I didn't really care. As long as they let me live my life, they could do what they wanted. They were basically part of the household at that point. Lila popped in and out and everyone either ignored me or acted polite. That was fine by me. I didn't really care for them, and honestly, I never felt close to my mom anyway, so I didn't feel any attachment to her new family. I just wanted my peace and quiet. But then things changed. They made it official. Matt moved in for good, and that's when my mom dropped the bombshell. She told me I'd have to start sharing my bedroom with Lila. I flat out refused. That room was the only space I had ever truly felt comfortable in. It was mine, always had been, and I wasn't about to give that up for someone I barely knew. It was the one place in the house where I could breathe, and I wasn't going to sacrifice that. Of course, my mom and I ended up getting into a huge argument over it. She threatened to kick me out if I didn't comply. I was 15 at the time, and even though I was young, I wasn't stupid. I knew the law. I told her she legally couldn't just toss me out and that I wasn't backing down. She was pissed, but in the end, she gave in. Instead of forcing me to share, she turned the basement into a bedroom for Lila. It wasn't a bad setup, honestly. At first, it looked kind of gloomy, but my mom put in effort to make it nice. By the time she was done, it looked like a regular bedroom, nothing wrong with it. I didn't get why Lila had a problem with it. But apparently that's when things went downhill. Lila started acting like she had a personal grudge against me. Maybe it was because when Mom gave them the tour of the house, she said right in front of Lila that the reason she had to take the basement was because I wouldn't share my room. To this day, I don't know why she said that out loud. Maybe she wanted to guilt-trip me in front of everyone, or maybe she just liked stirring up drama. Either way, it was weird and awkward, and while I felt a little bad for Lila in that moment, I didn't regret standing my ground. I think that moment flipped a switch in Lila. She didn't let it go. After that, she started treating me like some kind of enemy. Every time she stayed with us, life became miserable. She was awful cruel, really. She'd say the most hurtful things right to my face. I remember once, she told me my dad probably left my mom because of me. Then she laughed like it was some kind of joke. She'd mock my looks. I was chubby back then, and she even found ways to make school worse for me. There was no reason for it. She just seemed to enjoy being mean. Lila had this pack of girls at school, your classic mean girl crew, and they made it their mission to make my life hell. Before that, she and her little entourage pretty much ignored me, which I honestly preferred. Lila and I were never friends, but being strangers was a whole lot better than being targets. The worst part? I never did anything to her. Not a thing. Her hatred came from me not wanting to give up my room. That was it. She acted like I'd personally wronged her when really I was just trying to hold on to the only space that felt like mine. My bedroom was my safe zone. And with a mom like mine, can you really blame me for wanting a little peace and privacy? It wasn't just about the room, it was about feeling like I had some control over my life. If they'd even tried to get to know me, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I could have opened up. But Lila was basically a stranger, and I wasn't ready to lose my last bit of freedom for someone who treated me like I was nothing. I never told my mom or Matt about what was happening because they already knew. And let's be honest, they didn't give a damn. I could have been bullied into the ground and they still wouldn't have lifted a finger. I wasn't their priority. Never had been. So I just had to deal with it. Lila ran all over me, and when I did try to stand up for myself, it only made things worse. Our parents would jump in and surprise, I'd be the one grounded. They always took her side, no questions asked. Lila had this trick where she'd tear up just enough to make herself look like the victim. I couldn't fake cry like she could, and I sure as hell wasn't as manipulative. So I'd get blamed for everything and she'd skate off scot-free. They'd tell me to act more like a sister while she got away with treating me like trash. Growing up in that house was like living in a prison run by mean girls. It was miserable. So when I finally got kicked out right around my 18th birthday, I wasn't devastated, I was relieved. I'd survived that circus for years, and it had only gotten worse as time went on. Lila kept being awful and the adults kept enabling her. In just 4 years, she managed to turn nearly our entire high school class against me. I had maybe 2 or 3 friends who still talked to me. Everyone else hated me simply because she did, and apparently that was enough of a reason. It wrecked my mental health. I started stress eating, and before long, the weight piled on. My appearance took a serious hit. I was overweight, had breakouts all the time, and my hair was a disaster. I looked as rough as I felt. School wasn't any better. I was struggling hard just to keep my grades from tanking. So on top of everything else, people thought I was stupid too. I had nothing going for me. I felt like I was at rock bottom. At home, it was just more of the same. Lila was still in full attack mode, and my mom had gotten even more short-tempered. She'd constantly compare me to Lila like I wasn't even trying. But the truth was, she was the one who dragged me down. Things had already been bad before she married Matt, but after that it got 10 times worse. Sure, she didn't care much about me before, but at least back then she didn't actively make me feel like garbage. Once Matt and Lila were in the picture, it was like I was living with the school bullies and their supportive PTA parents. It was painfully obvious that Lila was the daughter my mom had always wanted. Too bad life gave her me instead. I know they both wished I'd just disappear, and honestly, I felt the same way. My mom and Lila hated me, and Matt? He didn't hate me, he just didn't care. Which was almost worse. I had no extended family to turn to. My grandparents weren't in the picture. I'd never met my dad's side, and my father might as well have been a ghost. I didn't have anywhere else to go. And asking my few friends for help felt too awkward and humiliating. So I stayed. I swallowed my pride and hung on just long enough to make it to 18, just so I'd have a roof over my head and food to eat. That was the deal I had with life, just make it to adulthood, then escape. But a few weeks before my birthday, something happened and it blew up my entire world in one day. I still remember it like it was yesterday. It was a weekend and one of the worst, most humiliating days I've ever lived through. Lila and I had both just graduated and she'd started hanging with a bigger, older crowd. One of her friends had a brother in college and Lila started dating him. So naturally, she and her friend got pulled into that whole college party scene. I knew what was going on. I didn't say anything because I figured it would just backfire on me. I'd learned the hard way that telling the truth never helped when it came to Lila. So I kept quiet even though I knew she was drinking and probably smoking weed too, though I couldn't prove it. Not that I was interested in that stuff. I didn't have cool friends, and honestly, I had enough going on. Between my weight, my grades, and my depression, the last thing I needed was to add drugs or alcohol to the mix. Then came that day. I must have left my door unlocked before jumping in the shower. Next thing I know, my mom is pounding on the bathroom door, screaming at me to come out immediately. I rushed to dry off and get dressed, heart racing because I knew something was wrong. When I stepped out, there they were, my mom, Matt, and Lila, all standing in my room with these cold, angry looks on their faces. My mom pulled out a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed. But that wasn't the worst of it, she also had a giant plastic bag filled with what looked like weed. A lot of it. They didn't know whose it was. But I did. It sure as hell wasn't mine. I'm pretty sure Lila planted it there when I was in the shower and then ran to tell my mom like she'd just uncovered some deep, dark secret. They flipped out, screamed at me like I was some criminal. My mom didn't just yell about the drugs and alcohol, she unloaded everything she'd been holding back for years. Said I was a disgrace. Said I ate too much. Called me a waste of space. She said I'd never amount to anything. That I was going to mooch off them forever and ruin their lives. That I'd never be more than a burden. I tried over and over to explain that the weed and the bottles weren't mine. I didn't even know how they ended up in my room. But my mom wasn't having it. The second I suggested Lila might have planted it there to frame me, she completely lost it. She started screaming about how I'd always been jealous of Lila, that I'd never measure up to her in any way, and that blaming her was just my pathetic way of avoiding responsibility. By then, I was sobbing, like full-body crying, but she didn't let up. She just kept tearing into me. Eventually, she stopped yelling long enough to say, "You need to leave." I was stunned. I asked her where I was supposed to go, and she just shrugged and told me she didn't care. Said she was done with me and wanted me out of the house. No more pretending we were some kind of family. When I refused, she threatened to call the police. She told me that since I was nearly 18, the drug charges would be taken seriously and I'd be treated like an adult. She didn't want an addict eating up her money and resources. That's how she said it. An addict. Me. She said she was tired of pretending we had a normal life and couldn't keep pretending I was worth anything. I was begging her not to do this. I wanted out, sure, but I had nowhere else to go and I didn't have a dime to my name. But she didn't care. She told me if I wasn't gone by the end of the day, she'd call the cops herself. I stood there, totally shocked, realizing just how cruel she could be. And the wildest part? Matt and Lila didn't say a word. They just went about their day like nothing out of the ordinary was happening. After a while, I gave up trying to reason with anyone and started packing. As much as it terrified me, I figured being homeless was better than ending up with a record for something I didn't even do. By evening, my bags were packed. No one said a word as I left. No goodbye. No look back. I walked out of that house for good. At first, I wandered to a nearby park and sat on a bench. I didn't know what else to do. It was getting cold and the fear started to set in. I finally decided to try my luck and went to my best friend Amy's apartment. I hoped she'd let me stay the night. Thankfully, she did. Amy had known for years what my home life was like, so I didn't have to explain much. But when I told her what had happened that day, she was shocked. Horrified, really. She asked if she could tell her parents about it. I'd always made her promise not to, partly because I was embarrassed, but also because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I'd spent so long keeping it all to myself that it felt wrong to suddenly let people in. But that night, Amy insisted. She said it wasn't right for me to deal with this alone. So I sat down and told her parents everything. And to their credit, they listened. They were just as horrified as she was. They even tried to call my mom to talk things out, but it didn't help. My mom was rude and dismissive, just like I expected. So Amy's parents decided they weren't going to waste time negotiating with someone like her. Instead, they did something I'll never forget. They told me I could stay with them as long as I needed to. No time limit. No strings attached. They were well off, so money wasn't a concern, and Amy was happy to share her room with me. They made me feel safe for the first time in my life. I lived with them for a few years while I attended community college, the only place I could get into after my grades had taken a hit in high school. I worked part-time jobs, saved up little by little, and Amy's parents always made sure I had everything I needed. They never pressured me to move out or make it on my own before I was ready. Eventually, about 3 years ago, I'd saved enough to get my own place. The day I moved into my apartment was one of the proudest moments of my life. Amy and her parents helped me move in, and before they left, they reminded me I'd always have a home with them if I ever needed it. That was the turning point. My life finally started to turn around. I'd lost a lot of weight by then and was taking better care of myself. I felt good for the first time in years. I had a steady income, I looked healthier, and most importantly, I felt confident in who I was becoming. With everything finally falling into place, I figured it was time to start dating again. I wanted a real relationship, something meaningful. I went out with a few guys here and there, but none of them really clicked. And then I met Ethan. Everything made sense after I met him. All the flings, all the almost relationships, they fizzled because they weren't him. Ethan was different. When we first started seeing each other, I had no idea he came from money. I just thought he was funny and charming and genuinely nice. We got along so well right away, it felt easy. Natural. It wasn't until a few months in that he told me his family owned a restaurant chain and that someday he'd inherit the whole thing. Some people might assume that changed things for me, but it didn't. I loved Ethan the same way I did before I knew any of that. He could have been broke and I still would have chosen him. We moved in together after about a year of dating. By then, I'd already met his family and they welcomed me with open arms. No tension. No judgment. Just warmth. Everything felt like it was finally going right. So when Ethan got down on one knee and asked me to marry him, there was no hesitation. I said yes. We've been engaged for 2 months now and life's been good. Until 2 weeks ago when Lila suddenly popped back into my life. Out of nowhere, I get this email from her. We hadn't talked in almost 8 years. Not a word. I hadn't heard from my mom either, not since the day I left. So when I saw her name in my inbox, my stomach dropped. I didn't know what to expect. Definitely not an apology. But that's exactly what it was. Lila said she was sorry. Said she'd been horrible to me for no reason. She even admitted she was the one who planted the weed and bottles in my room to get me kicked out. I was stunned. Why come clean now? After all these years, what was the point? And then it clicked, the timing. I just announced my engagement online. It was on social media, and even though we weren't connected, we had mutual people from high school. Word must have gotten to her. Suddenly, her reaching out didn't seem so innocent anymore. Something about Lila's apology didn't sit right with me, so I decided to dig a little deeper. It didn't take long to figure things out. Turns out Lila is married to a guy who runs the company that supplies plastic containers and other packaging materials to Ethan's restaurant chain. The connection was too weird to ignore. Honestly, it was easy to uncover. I made a fake profile, stalked her page a bit, and from there found her husband's profile. Right in his bio, he mentioned his business and what they did. It all clicked instantly. Since Ethan and I planned to take over the company from his dad one day, I'd already been learning the ins and outs of how it all works. So I knew exactly who this guy was once I saw the name. When I put the pieces together, I told Ethan right away. And let me just say, I haven't looked back at my old life in years. I made it a point not to follow any of my family on social media, and I asked my friends not to give me updates. I didn't even know Lila was married, let alone that she'd been for a while. The second I found out we were indirectly doing business with her husband, Ethan, and I decided to cut ties. To be fair, it wasn't just about Lila. Her husband's products had already been causing issues, higher costs, declining quality, and late shipments. Ethan and his dad were already considering switching suppliers. So when we found out who was behind it, that sealed the deal. A few days after Lila's email came in, Ethan officially terminated the contract with her husband. He met with him, ended the deal, and walked away professionally. But somehow Lila spun the whole thing into a personal attack. She went on social media, tagging our business page, accusing me of sabotaging her life just to get revenge. She claimed I was holding a grudge after all these years and that what we did was unprofessional. She even wrote that losing our account was the final nail in the coffin after other clients had dropped them too. Look, I do feel a little bad. According to her post, she and her husband are seriously struggling now. But while some part of this might have felt personal, it was mostly about business. Ethan and his dad wouldn't have dropped her husband just on my word alone. They had valid reasons and it made financial sense. Still, the guilt crept in. I started second-guessing myself. Did I make things worse by saying something? Update 1. Ethan talked it over with his dad's lawyers and they agreed we handled things appropriately. Now we're pursuing legal action. We've asked them to take down her defamatory post and we're filing formal charges. The guy was charging us a premium and delivering subpar products. Naturally, if we found a better deal elsewhere, we were going to take it. It just so happens that Lila is married to the guy, pure coincidence. Instead of focusing on fixing their business, she decided to smear us online. I can't believe I actually felt sorry for her after everything she's done to me. But reading your comments and support really helped. You all reminded me I have nothing to be ashamed of. So thank you, I mean it. Update 2. A few days ago, Ethan and his dad officially filed a defamation suit against Lila and her husband. We're set to meet with a mediator next week. But of course, here comes my mom, writing in like it's her mission to protect Lila, her precious little stepdaughter, all over again. It's honestly ridiculous. It feels like I'm back in high school, caught in the same drama, but this time, I don't have to care. I've got my own life now. I've got Ethan. I've got stability. I don't need to win my mother's approval anymore just to have a place to sleep. She can cry and scream all she wants, nothing she says matters to me now. She's tried reaching out a few times since Lila got served, but I've blocked her everywhere. I'm not letting the kind of toxicity back into my life. I'm getting married to the man I love and nothing they say or do is going to ruin that for me. Update 3. Quick final update, we won. The defamation suit went in our favor and honestly, it wasn't even close. Ethan's dad hired some of the most ruthless lawyers I've ever seen, and they crushed it. Lila and her husband had to pay up and we reached a settlement. Hopefully now they'll focus more on fixing their business instead of trying to tear other people down. And now that all of that's behind us, we can finally focus on the fun stuff, our wedding. I'm so excited. I've waited a long time to find someone like Ethan, and now that I have, I'm not letting go. He's my person. My future. My peace. Thanks for listening to my story. If you stuck with me through all this, I really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more real-life stories that you won't believe actually happened.